Talk about the origin of the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net.
So in the latter part of the 30s, Al Parker, who was living in Kinston at that time, started a group down in eastern North Carolina, and he would call together the group every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Well, I can't say that he put a name to that group, but it wasn't long after 1936, of course, till the amateurs had nets that covered all of the country. And he is responsible, as time went on, and he is responsible for what we call the Albert Parker Award in the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net, because he was the originator of the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net. And that happened after the Hurricane Hazel in October, first weekend in October 1954. Up to that time, he had his group, and I don't think he had a real name for it, but it did not meet regularly, that is 7 days a week. But Uncle Al and the people that were involved in Hazel decided that it would be a very good idea that if we could have a daily gathering, and that's whenever the name Coastal Carolina Emergency Net come to being. And since that time, and that's been a good little while ago, every night at 7 o'clock, we gather together as a group and at the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net for the sole purpose of, not for the sole purpose either, I don't really mean it for the sole purpose, but the primary purpose was to be able to be of service to the people of our state, and through the efforts of giving them emergency communications whenever power lines are down, whenever telephone lines are down, and there's a need for us to have communications in the various areas of Red Cross, the county governments, the state governments are all involved in it. And that is the beginning and grassroots of the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net, which is still very active and has spread out to the point that at this time we have members all the way from New York to Georgia. And we still call it the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net, because rightfully so, that's where it started. And that's kind of good history of the origination and what Coastal Carolina Emergency Net is.
How long was Al Parker active in the net?
Well, you're putting me on the spot a little bit, Dan. I don't remember when he became a silent key. Incidentally, for those that are not familiar with amateur radio talk, silent key means that they have passed on, that they have died. And the reason we say silent key whenever we use our Morse code keys, why you're active with it. But whenever you become a silent key, of course, you can't use it any longer. So it must have been in the early 60s. I have no way right offhand to tell you exactly how long. But he was active from the 30s on up till during the 60s.
Was he in New Bern?
Yes, he moved to New Bern, and I don't remember what year he moved to New Bern, but he moved to New Bern, and his first residence was out there in the 2 or 3 story apartments on a river road out there, whatever they call it, up against the New Trent River. And I've visited with him several times. In fact, the first single sideband transmitter that I ever saw, Exciter, was in his shack, and I didn't know what all that squeaking and squawking and noise was until between him and another outstanding member of the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net up at near Elizabeth City had one too, and whenever they got on the frequency, I'll think of his name in a minute maybe, why somebody said if you'll just turn your BFO on your receiver and tune real careful, you can understand what they're saying. So that's the way I first received a single sideband on the net frequencies and anywhere else that I wanted to go. But you could take an ordinary AM receiver, and if you tuned it right with BFO, that means beat frequency oscillator, incidentally, you can tune in the single sideband signal, and it's readable, it's understandable. Oscar Hines, I knew I'd think of it. W4LCV, it lived up in right outside of Elizabeth City, and he was another outstanding Coastal Carolina emergency net member. One reason was that he was a terrific CW, continuous wave operator, and used what we call bugs or keys anymore to communicate with the Morse code, and that is still being used incidentally, even though FCC doesn't require it for you to be able to copy it whenever you get your amateur radio license this day.
Any final thoughts on ham radio or the net? Any closing thoughts?
Well, there's not much room. I don't mean we're perfect, but for improvement. Now, the purpose of net that I mentioned before is the first sentence in the FCC rules and regulations about amateurs is the fact that they are warranted because their prime purpose is to handle emergency traffic. That's not exactly the wording, but that's what the first line in Section 97 in the FCC Book of Rules and Regulations. So that's the prime purpose, and I think we should never get away from that idea. I enjoy the things that we talk about. I enjoy all of the friends that I make on all of the other nets, but there's one net that I try to be a part of as much as possible, and that is one that is a part of the emergency communication system, not only in North Carolina, but locally and even countrywide. So the only thing that I can really say that we should not overlook that fact and just think that it's only there for us to have fun and talk about each other and that sort of a thing. And of course, the Coastal Carolina Emergency Net is one of the nets that is prepared and has been prepared for these many years to handle emergency traffic of all sorts. At one time years ago, we used to handle any traffic, written or just informal, as we call it. But basically, we shouldn't forget really why we are privileged to have the amateur radio frequency that we do have, because I assure you there are plenty of people out there that would like very much to have the frequencies that we have the privilege of using, and would be glad to pay to take away. In fact, they've already done a certain portion of some of them. So that's basically the thing. Let's just don't forget that and remember really why we are allowed to use the ham frequencies. See you in church tomorrow.